Okay,
Okay, welcome everyone to our program tonight. I'll go ahead and just get into it here. I wanted to let you know before we get started, we will be live tweeting this tonight. Misha will be our social media director is going to be live tweeting this tonight with the hashtag Fantastic Libraries. So keep an eye out for that if you're on Twitter tonight. Just want to get into this tonight. We have Gabrielle Haisong is going to be our first speaker this evening. She is from Rolls-Royce, an information operative and senior librarian there. So if you want to go ahead and get started, Gabrielle, thank you.
Okay. Are you able to see my screen at all? Nope. Hold on here.
Okay.
Gabrielle, have you in Zoom?
There we
there's
go.
the toolbar.
Share. Yeah, the share, and there's my screen. Hold on. And
yay.
There we go. You're obviously, there we go. You see that now?
Yep, we're good to go.
My life as a corporate librarian. Solo and global, no less. So I want to thank Jessica for inviting me and allowing me to share my experiences. I really appreciate this. I never thought I had anything that much to say about anything, but obviously you thought I did. So I will tell you about my experiences, and perhaps you can learn from that as I've learned from other librarians and experiences in my life. So, and I thought I would follow the format that you gave me. So a quick overview of my library environment and what Rolls-Royce does. We are not the car company. That was sold back in 1972 to BMW. We make all the gas turbine engines for aircraft, whether it's military, civilian. We also make engines for marine applications, so big ships, and also for energy production. And my library is actually the only library for Rolls-Royce. The library is a holdover from the days when our facilities was owned by General Motors, and then Rolls-Royce purchased the Allison engine division from GM in 1996. So I'm the only library and the only librarian for Rolls-Royce for a global company of 55,000 employees. So as a solo, I primarily support the engineers and other services located in Indianapolis. However, now my reach is global since our new intranet has gone global. So everyone globally can see the library's homepage and the services that I offer. However, not everything, since it's not I don't do everything globally for everyone, they can't access some resources. So I know it makes a few people jealous in some of the other countries, and so they call me and ask for assistance. I do have an off-site librarian. She helps me out. She's a contractor. She worked for me in Indianapolis, and then she got her dream job of working for the New York Public Library as a young adult librarian. But she still assists me 10 hours a week with interlibrary loans, website updates, management of the engineering library email, and anything that she can do remotely. She's kind of my backup if I'm out of the office, so she can assist me on those things. So, and actually, the Rolls-Royce Library, when I took it over in 2007, the picture on the left, that's literally what it looked like. Those tables, those chairs were in there. The guys in the white shirts smoking with the ashtrays, that wasn't in there, but the library looked as though it was still 1965. And so I made it my mission, because I was a brand new librarian. What could I do to make over this library? How could I change it? I had no preconceived notions of how to run a library. I'd never even worked in a library before, let alone run one. So I thought, well, if nothing else, if I get 1 year of experience in, it's something that I can put on my resume and say, yes, I worked at Rolls-Royce as the corporate librarian, and that would give me entree perhaps to other library jobs. But today, after almost 12 years, this is what my library looks like now. I'm in a new location in downtown Indianapolis. This is a seating area where people can read newspapers, etc. Gaze out of the windows. I have floor-to-ceiling windows on the north and east side of my walls, and it's just a wonderful ambiance to be in there. And I have one of the greatest spots in our campus in downtown Indianapolis. So some of my work responsibilities, I am a solo librarian, but I don't find it lonely necessarily. Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to talk to another librarian sitting next to me, or have conversations like, engineers get to talk to each other, people in purchasing get to talk to each other, etc. But I love the challenge of it. I get to do it all: the budget, the website design, collection development, research, cataloging, copyright management, you name it. I do it all in the library. I also serve on our Knowledge Management Steering Committee. I'm the subject matter expert for Engine Room, our global intranet. So I assist other editors with their web pages and the design of their web pages. And I manage a parts petting zoo in my library. I do lunch and learns, and I loan out laptops. So that keeps me busy. It kind of keeps me out of trouble. So that's kind of my day there. And my career path, I'm one of those late bloomers. After my husband died in 1992, I was a young widow, and I was like, what do I do? So I decided to finish my undergrad degree. I have a BS in public health with a concentration in environmental science, and I worked in that career for 10 years. And it was all of a sudden one day I was at my job, I wasn't enjoying it anymore, and it was like an epiphany. Quit your job, sell your house, and go to graduate school and become a librarian. And so I did that. And it's either a midlife crisis, or I just said, what the heck, let's try something new. So my career pathway, while in grad school, I did all kinds of jobs. So you can see I worked as a tour guide for relocating Eli Lilly employees, test examiner for CTB McGraw-Hill, and I was a cataloger for the Rolls-Royce library, and that's how I got my foot in the door. It was originally just supposed to be a 3-month position, but then the librarian kept expanding my contract for the next 2 years to do other projects. Internships, of course, they were all unpaid. I did a lot of cataloging and scanning projects. And since I had been studying to become a medical librarian, all my work was done based on the fact that, oh, I'm going to become a medical librarian. So you can see that's why I was involved with IU Med School, etc. So I also I do my time management grid, so I won't go over this, but you can kind of see, if you're familiar with Stephen Covey and the time management grid, it really does help so I can keep my day organized and make sure that I'm not wasting my time on things that are not important and not urgent. So a few little words of wisdom for me. When I started with Rolls-Royce, I didn't know the first thing about gas turbine engines. So man, I made it I took a lot of internal courses on gas turbine engines. I tried to learn all aspects of the company, network like mad, do a lot of marketing, and most importantly, I always show my return on investment. So that's really important, because if they view you as a cost center, if you're not showing what you're saving the company, then the company could look to cut you. I also try to make my library unique. I have an engine parts petting zoo, so people can come in and check out engine parts for STEM events, for presentations, etc., come down and look at parts if they're not familiar with what a vane or a blade or an igniter looks like. I also have children's books about engineering and aerospace in the library, so a lot of the parents check those out and take those home so they can read those and say, this is what mommy and daddy do at work. I've always attended a lot of SLA conferences and other meetings, which was really important. Read a lot of blogs, books, listservs. I follow others. You know, it's like, what are the best practices? I also, through SLA, received my certificate in copyright management and knowledge management from SLA, both great certificate programs. I also serve on an external committee, kind of just gives, it's just another way for me to interact with other librarians involved in with the Indiana State Library. And the one important thing I always try to do is maintain communication with my manager. It's really important. He's not a librarian, he's an engineer, but he's a good manager, and he's very supportive. He doesn't micromanage, but he always fights for what the library needs, which is space and funding. And he's just been a wonderful, he's been my manager now for 11 years, so I think he's just been great. And the one thing I've learned is you got to learn to adapt to change. There are a lot of upheavals always going on in the corporate world. And one of the things was I went from medical librarianship to engineering. Suddenly it's like, oh, what do engineers need? I wasn't familiar with engineering resources and gray literature, etc. You know, medical librarianship just seemed real straightforward to me with mesh and everything else. So, and then I also had the joys of moving a library from our old location at the factory to our downtown facility. So moving a library was quite a learning experience also. I did an open house, so a lot of marketing. So you can see a poster I did for my open house. And it was amazing. I had 185 people show up in that time frame. So it was a really great open house. So learned a lot of things from that, but it was really great to get people into the library. And then finally, some last words of wisdom, which you can probably read since my time is up. Try to take a leadership role in your organization. And so I try to do that. I serve on the Knowledge Management Steering Committee, which reaches throughout the company, and we try to develop best practices for knowledge management. I try to help people with change, especially with a lot that's going on when there's reorganization in the company. And, you know, it's like, okay, this is a positive change. We can work through this, and try to maintain that level of communication. I love being a librarian. It's the best thing. It was the best career move I ever made. And the one thing I always try to remember is, it's a John Maxwell quote, is success is due to our stretching to the challenges of life. Failure comes when we shrink from them. And so it was when I decided to become a librarian, you know, I had a good career. I worked in that for 10 years, and suddenly I was like, I wanted to do something else. I felt I wasn't motivated anymore. It just wasn't wowing me. I was missing something. And it was at the age of 50 that I quit my job and sold my house and went to graduate school. Most people are starting to think about retirement, but I said, let's have a do-over here. And I've never regretted any of it. So thank you very much for letting me present, and there's my contact information, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. It was wonderful to hear you again. I actually heard Gabrielle speak at the SLA conference in Baltimore earlier in the summer. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also, our next two speakers as well, Sarah and I both met while we were at SLA in Baltimore as well. So next up, we have Justin Smith, who's going to be presenting. He is the manager of library and information services at the Nestle Purina Pet Care Company. So Justin, if you want to go ahead, and there we go. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jessica and Sarah, for organizing this and having me. It's really nice to meet you guys in Baltimore, and I always like hearing about other people's experiences. That was, Gabrielle, that was fascinating, and I agree with every point you made. So I'll talk a little bit more about my experience from a corporate library perspective. I don't have a lot of slides, and they're mostly just pictures, so it'll give you something to look at while you hear me talk. So again, my name is Justin Smith. I manage the library at Nestle Purina Corporation, which is in St. Louis, Missouri. This is not a picture of me. This is just some stock photo that they make me use in the slide templates. Anyway, I, like many other corporate librarians, took a weird route to be a corporate librarian. I call myself an accidental corporate librarian. So I did my undergrad at University of Illinois in English and rhetoric. Didn't really know what I wanted to do with that or what I could do with that. And so I went back to graduate school, also for English, because why not just double down? And then I started teaching, at local colleges. I was adjunct teaching at 2 local universities in the area. And I was also doing some part-time work at the public library in the town that I lived. So my mom's a librarian too, so that was always kind of in my blood. And so I got the job in 2008. So I actually just celebrated 10 years at Purina, in which I was a technician. I just hired as a kind of a lower position in the library. I worked full time, got benefits from that, and then went back to school in 2011 using tuition assistance through Purina, which is nice. And then eventually was promoted to manager in 2012. And I graduated from the University of Illinois with my MLS in 2014. So U of I, similar to San Jose State, has an online program, which is great for if you're working full time. I obviously am active in SLA. I'm actually the current St. Louis metro area chapter president. Everything Gabrielle said, I would second. It's a great way to network, expand your skill set, find mentors, really just feel connected to a profession too. All those things. So I'll talk about Purina a little bit. So Purina is based in St. Louis, Missouri. Here's an aerial shot. We have, I don't know how many acres. It's big. So not all of this is Purina. Some in the top portion of the photograph is not, but the majority is, and there's even some more to the right if the picture expanded a little further. The company began in 1894, so next year will be our 125th anniversary. It was founded by a man named William H. Danforth, and at that time it was known as Ralston Purina. And we produced products. Animal feed was the first one, and then expanded into human cereals, hot cereals, and rice cereals and things like that. Throughout the years, they added to the business pet food, obviously. They owned Energizer batteries at one point, Jack in the Box restaurant chain, Chicken of the Sea tuna, Chex cereals, even really weird stuff. Like we owned the NHL team, the hockey team, the St. Louis Blues for a couple of years. But eventually they jettisoned all of those and then just became pet food. And that, of course, made it attractive for a buyer. In 2001, Purina was acquired by Nestle, based in Switzerland. So now the only products that the company make are dog food, cat food, and litter. Today, one of the largest pet food companies in the world. I'm sure you've heard of many of the brands. Dog Chow, Cat Chow, Pro Plan, Friskies, Tidy Cats. Again, we're looking at a picture of the downtown. It's a little bit south of downtown. If you've been to St. Louis, it's a little bit south of downtown, but very near like where the Cardinals play. But the campus is great. There are 9 major buildings. There's a Japanese garden with a koi pond you can see there. There's an on-site daycare, company store, gym, dog park. You can bring your dog to work, which is an amazing aspect of my work. So that's a little bit about the company. So a little bit about the library. This is the library today. This is only probably maybe 2/3 of the library. There's another portion as well. So it was established in 1929 from what we can tell. It then reported to R&D, and it's gone through many evolutions since then. So in 1989, it became what it's currently known as, which is Library and Information Services. That's our full title. We currently have 4 employees. That is 3 librarians. There's also 1 company archivist who report to me. And it's a specialized collection, a lot of subject areas you might expect. So veterinary science, food, nutrition, general business, finance, packaging, personal development, things of that nature. As far as our reporting structure, it's a little odd. We actually report into the facilities group, who then reports to HR. So I guess technically we're seated under HR, but we're reporting to the same group that like the mail services, or there's a print shop, security, all of these things report to the same group as us. So we're a little bit, I don't think we're properly aligned right now, but I'm currently working on that. Also, we do serve an array of customers. So it's everyone in Purina and St. Louis, of course, but then anyone who is at a factory, or perhaps somebody who's at a research facility across the globe. So we're working globally, but the majority of our customers are in St. Louis with us. Just to give you kind of example, actually, I should talk about the services we provide. So we do have a print collection that's shrinking, and while we're pouring more resources into the electronic collection, we do current awareness alerts, we'll do interlibrary loans, we administer the language learning tool Rosetta Stone. We have the corporate subscription, we manage the corporate subscription for that tool. Providing database access, we'll provide subscription services, subscribing to electronic journals and ebooks and things of that nature. I talked a little bit about the archives, which I'll kind of show you now. This is an exhibit we did we're doing a kind of a timeline, and so this is a portion of an exhibit we did recently, and so that gives you an idea of the work that we're doing to kind of promote this and spread the company culture a little more. The archives actually I established under me. It was established in 2014, which is a little bit behind because it was a mere 120 years after the company was founded. So you can imagine there were a lot of things that perhaps were lost. Luckily, a lot of people collect things. The company is very highly regarded in the community, and so therefore a lot of employees will stay with the company for a very long time, and that leads to people collecting a lot of things. And so we were actually able to save and preserve a lot of amazing artifacts and items. The archives primarily are made of print materials. So we're looking at packaging or photographs, memos, sometimes 3-dimensional objects as well. And so it's a very interesting project, and we've really expanded the visibility of it in the company, and everybody's kind of realizing the great asset that our history is. Here is another, so just some random old packages, one from Canada. As far as some of the hurdles to our library, we are in a very large campus, as I mentioned, and our location in the building that we're in isn't exactly great because it's a research and development building. And so therefore it's a little more restrictive in terms of access. You can't get into the building without walking into the lobby first. All the other buildings, well, many of the other buildings on campus, you can walk in any door, but that's not the case for this one. And so therefore it leads to people thinking they can't come to our location, which they can. So we try to do things like hold open houses. I heard that earlier, or having events in a lobby of a mainly used building. We have a free book cart similar to a tiny free library that will move around to different lobby buildings of the main buildings on campus. And we get people who we've had HR bring new associates up to visit us on their first day. So there's a lot of things we're trying, and we're continuing to try as we move along, and trying to gain visibility in the company. So I'm running low on time, but I'll talk a little bit about my work and responsibilities. One thing one of the things I've loved very much about being a library is just the varied aspect of it. I'm doing different things day to day, and that keeps it interesting. I manage a team, of course. I oversee the day-to-day operations of the library, but I'm also responsible for, we have an organization development group, but I'm responsible for suggesting and training my employees, managing the department budget, conducting resource evaluations, interacting with vendors, and then backing up various positions as well. We're a small library, and so we kind of have to have each other's backs when it comes to that. I will wrap it up here, but if you want to get in touch with me, there's my contact information, and I will stick around for any questions. I do have a 6-month-old, however, so I don't think I'll be able to stick around for the whole meeting. I wish I could, but I will stop and answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you so much, Justin. Let me see. Did anybody have a quick question for Justin since he has to get going? It doesn't look like it right now, but I'll put up your information. But thank you so much. It was good. It's good quote seeing you again, Justin. So.
Sure thing. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. All right. Next up, we have Amy Jankowski, who is a life sciences librarian at the University of New Mexico. So, Amy, if you want to go ahead and get started, thanks.
Sure thing. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we're good to go.
Perfect. All right, so thank you for the introduction, and thanks for those great presentations about some really cool special libraries by Gabrielle and Justin. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my current work, but also precede that with a little bit about a special library position that I had prior to moving into academic libraries. So I'm going to frame all of that with my academic background and kind of start from the beginning there. So I earned my BA in anthropology and then followed that with my MLS with a specialization in archives and records management. So I first became curious about library and archives work while I was working as an undergraduate registration assistant in basically a cultural history museum on the University of Illinois campus. And my boss at the time, who was the museum registrar, was earning her MLIS while I was working there. And I was just really excited to hear about the option of an educational path, potentially into museum work, but also something that would open up doors to a lot of different kind of related career paths. And I took a year after graduating from undergrad to get a little bit of work experience to make sure that an MLS was a good fit for me. And I tried my hand at some archival processing internships and also worked for almost a year in a special collection library, basically being a page. So those kind of really supported my interests in history and museums and kind of the library field and how that's related to those. So this is a list of those early positions that I had. And then during my MLS program, I had a few other positions, like basically student work, that also focused on museums and archival work. So I worked at a historic house museum with their archives, university archives, and also in a special collections library archives. So a lot of different little positions that gave me a pretty well-rounded introduction into work in that field. So when I graduated, I started my first professional librarian job with San Diego Zoo Global. I've, for a long time, been interested in zoos, ecology, and species conservation work, so I couldn't quite cut it as an actual science student. So I saw this opportunity as a total dream job. I can combine those subject areas I was interested in with library work. So I was assistant librarian from mid-2011 through 2012, and then associate director of library services, which is the lead role in the library, from 2013 through 2015. And a little bit of background about San Diego Zoo Global. It's basically the nonprofit umbrella organization for 3 different units. So there's, of course, the world famous, as they like to call it, San Diego Zoo, which is located in San Diego proper. The San Diego Zoo Safari Park, which is basically similar to a zoo with larger kind of naturalistic animal habitats. And that's located about 30 miles north in Escondido, California. And then there's also the Institute for Conservation Research, which is the research arm of San Diego Zoo Global. And that's also located in Escondido with additional field sites locally, regionally, and in a number of different global locations as well. Oh, and for short, we call San Diego Zoo Global SDZG. All right, so the SDZG library employs 2 full-time librarians and a half-time research assistant, and they're also assisted by a strong team of interns and volunteers. The librarians share responsibilities for maintaining library and archives collections, as well as electronic resources in the library website. And they also facilitate access to information resources in general, field research and reference requests, and conduct outreach. The research assistant also does kind of a unique role where that person basically creates animal fact sheets. So they conduct in-depth research to create these species accounts that are requested to inform educational and interpretive content for new exhibits in the zoo and safari park. And all 3 people really work as a strong team and kind of share different responsibilities and things like that, depending on people's strengths. The library itself houses about 10,000 print volumes, and it also includes a small rare book and archives room. So kind of the entrance to the library is this shot of the computers and the nice windows out into the San Pasqual Valley, and then in the lower left is the archives facility. It's pretty tiny, but there's a lot of really cool rare books as well as manuscripts, ephemera, things like that. All right. So the library is located in a building called the Beckman Center, and that's on the edge of the Safari Park property. So it opened in about 2007, and prior to that, the library was located down at the zoo in San Diego. The Beckman Center also houses the majority of the Institute for Conservation Research's labs and offices. So those are in subject areas including animal and plant ecology, genetics, reproductive physiology, infectious disease, and conservation education. SDZG employees are the core patron base for the library, and they work in areas including research, as I mentioned, also animal and plant care, veterinary services, education, marketing, and administration, among a few others. So within that range, employees really come in with a wide range of experience, expertise, and information needs. So we'll see, seasonal high school students to expert scientists. And the library collection really reflects the diversity of these subject areas and audiences. All right. Because the library is physically removed from the daily work of most of these employees, a large portion of the research and reference work is conducted by email or over the phone. So most people who are actually working with animals or doing veterinary work, they're really pressed for time and things like that. So we didn't see a lot of in-person traffic other than those research scientists. All right, so in terms of responsibilities, I talked a little bit about that, but I was initially hired to focus on the archival collection, since that's what I focused on in school. And I was the zoo's first ever trained archivist. So my early work focused on getting to know more about the archival materials there, setting priorities for processing, drafting policies and procedures, and also doing some arrangement and description of materials. And when my supervisor left for another position just about a year after I started, I moved into the library's lead management role. Despite not having management training, I think I heard that from Gabrielle as well. It's kind of a theme in special libraries, I think. I embraced the responsibility and really enjoyed the opportunity to learn new skills. As a manager, a typical day was really driven by the needs of that day, research requests, things like that. But some of the highlights of my work there included collection development, analytics and management for collections, supporting library employees and volunteers, budgeting, which I actually kind of enjoyed, who would have thought, and also doing outreach through things like emails and also a roving reference service. All right. So again, a theme that I've seen reflected in the other presentations. During my time at the zoo, the Special Library Association was super essential in helping me connect with and learn from other local librarians outside of my small library team. And I found it particularly helpful as such a new librarian in a new management role. And I quickly became involved in the SLA San Diego chapter. It's a really great chapter, so if any of you out there are located in San Diego, I definitely encourage you to connect with them. And I was also able to network with other zoo librarians nationwide. There aren't very many out there, but SLA really brought us together, which was very cool. All right, so from there, talking a little bit about my transition to academic libraries. In 2016, I moved into a new role as life sciences librarian at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. I loved a lot of things about work at the zoo, but at the same time, I felt it really wasn't the best fit for me long term. And I think it can be really hard to leave a job that you love a lot of aspects of, but embracing a new opportunity was a really empowering choice for me. So from working at the zoo library, I learned that I do solid work independently, but I thrive most in a community-oriented environment. So I really wanted to work in a larger library where I would contribute to more of a dynamic team, where I could play to my strengths and really learn from the diverse expertise of different colleagues. And this is an image of Zimmerman Library, the main library on UNM's campus. The libraries in general serve about 25,000 students, a pretty diverse student body, and they also employ around 100 staff and faculty librarians, plus a large number of student employees. So totally different from working in a small special library. As life sciences librarian, I work in Centennial Science and Engineering Library. And to help you visualize, here's an image of the exterior entrance, which is unfortunately the only part of the building above ground. That's probably my least favorite part of my job, but the other things kind of pan out. So no windows in this library, but we have a lot of really great different study spaces for students. And this is the interior there. All right, so my job is to serve as a liaison between the library and life science subjects areas on campus. So biology, sustainability studies, and other programs like public health, nutrition, and art and ecology. And my work includes library instruction, collection development and management, and outreach as my three really core areas. My typical day involves a mix of all of these. You might find me teaching an instruction session for a class, doing one-on-one research consults, planning outreach workshops, reaching out to department faculty, and a lot more. And the collection management and outreach skills I really developed at the zoo, and they transitioned really well into this new environment. So there's a lot of commonalities, despite how different these libraries are on the day-to-day. I did face a huge learning curve related to classroom teaching, though. I hadn't done a whole lot of that at the zoo. We did some workshops, but it wasn't a big part of that. So this is work that I really had to grow into through practice and the support of colleagues. One other aspect is that UNM librarians have tenure-track faculty status. So that means my job also requires contributions in research and service. And I did a substantial amount of professional service with SLA while I was working at the zoo. So continuing that was a natural trend, but the research aspect is kind of another story. I basically had to start from scratch with my research agenda. So that was another challenge for me, and it required a lot of creative thinking, reading, mentorship, and collaboration. Developing research and getting into the habit of writing would have been a lot easier if I had made it a part of my work at SCZG. So it's something I suggest to anyone considering a career transition into academic libraries at any point. Start thinking about research. You can always do research, even if you're not at an academic library. So even if it's not in your job description, practice-oriented scholarship in particular is a really great way to even just critically reflect on your own work. It can be really valuable. All right, so that's most of what I wanted to talk about with the library, and I know we're running over, so I won't go over these tips in too much depth, but I'm happy to talk about any of these in the questions or later on if you want to reach out. The most significant ones would be developing leadership skills, management skills. It can be helpful regardless of what position you find yourself in. And also, if you end up transitioning between different types of libraries, you go somewhere and you realize it's not the right fit for you, your perspective has really unique value. So when you go to a totally different environment, that can be seen as an advantage to your employer, and you can absolutely show your strengths in that regard. All right, so thank you for your attention, and hopefully if you have any questions, you can talk to me later or reach out on email or Twitter. Quick image credits as well. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy. It was nice hearing you again. I know
Yeah, absolutely.
we met at SLA as well.
I remember.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. And finally this evening, we have both Ann Hall and Paul Barrows from the they both are from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, are going to be speaking tonight. And they are actually both graduates of SJSU. So if you guys want to go ahead and get started, thank you.
Hi, this is Ann. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. And can people see the screen?
Yep, we can see the screen just fine. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so Cindy Hill, who's our manager, you'll see a picture of her. She originally was offered this because she is literally an SLA superstar. Like, she's amazing. If you ever go to an SLA conference, try to connect with her. Instead, you get Paul and I, who have really different perspectives, and so we're excited to be doing this because Cindy had a conflict. So let me make sure I know how to advance the slides here. There we go. So really quickly, I'll talk about the Federal Reserve System because I think it's just a little bit of helpful background to understand where Paul and I come from, and then we'll take turns going through and talking about our work. So there's the Federal Reserve System has three basic components. There's the Federal Open Market Committee, which is meeting right now by chance in DC. They meet 8 times a year, and that's what a lot of people hear about in the news. It happens to be our chair is Jerome Powell right now, and you'll hear him talking about an interest rate and different things about the economy. So people assume Federal Reserve, that's what it is, but there's actually much more. There's also the Board of Governors, which is a government entity. It's part of the cabinet, and it's part of the Treasury, I should say. And those are all government employees that are sort of our colleagues. Then there's the Federal Reserve Banks. And back when the Federal Reserve was founded or created in 1913, 1914, it had to be pretty complicated to satisfy a lot of different interests. And so the banks are not government. It's more to represent sort of the geographical distribution, the local banks, industry, things like that. And there's 12 of them. Paul and I are in the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. You can see it on the map. It's by far the largest because in 1914 there wasn't too much happening in that part of the country that justified more than that. Now we actually have a little bit more. We have 4 branches: Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake City, a cash processing center in Phoenix, and then of course our main head office in San Francisco. And so Paul and I are not government employees. We have a board of directors that is technically sort of the oversight for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, with a lot of government, follow government regulations and delegation of some things. So what do we do at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco? And that's our building right in downtown. We have 3 plus sort of a nice offshoot of basic functions. There's monetary policy, which I mentioned mostly people think of with the Federal Open Market Committee. So our president, or interim president in this case, is in DC right now to be able to express what San Francisco thinks for that. And we have economic researchers that we support. And then we also have services to financial institutions. So that would be, I say when I'm giving tours, sort of like an electric company or utility company for money, to make sure money is where it needs to be. Supervision and regulation has to do with things that we hear in the news about making sure that banks and related bank holding companies and such are doing what they're supposed to be doing, following guidelines, trying to assess risk and things like that. And then community development is an interesting area we like to highlight. Instead of thinking of community development like for a private bank, or excuse me, a commercial bank that would be giving away money, instead we convene different folks in a space to talk about an area and do a lot of research. So here's an overview, a little bit of our physical space. We actually are lucky enough, like some of the other sites, to have beautiful windows, which helps to attract people. But this shows our physical collection. And then we have a nice little, we call it our salon, our little 4 chairs there. And then where we fit into the organization is we roll up through communications and community engagement. And just like Justin was saying, it can make a big difference where you roll up. We used to be part of economic research. We still work with them a lot, but that reporting structure changed a number of years ago. We also focus a lot on our digital space, just like some of the others. Our physical collection is shrinking a little bit, and that was precipitated when we had a revamp of our space, so we temporarily moved out and moved back in. And so we voluntarily gave up some space because we knew it might have been taken from us. So that's sort of a tip, is to think about, where's the organization going? What are things you might be asked to do? And how could you instead volunteer and then maybe take the lead a little bit on it? So we work a lot on making sure we have digital resources for our users, and our primary users are our employees. There are very few external folks that come. That's changed a lot from what I hear from my predecessors. There used to be a lot of folks that would come, but now that's not really the case. So it's primarily our 1,700 employees and occasionally externals by request. If they say, hey, you guys have this and nobody else would, then we would think about that. For our staff, we have 6 of us, and we feel very lucky. We've done some reorgs the last few years to sort of make sure that everyone has their area of specialty but overlap, including data, content services. I'm archives, Paul's research librarian, you'll hear about both of us, and Cindy, our manager, and then Steve works on more news and media, and you'll hear about some of those things. And then we do have 3 San Jose grads, which we're very proud of: Cindy, myself, and Paul. So I'll turn it over to Paul for his work and responsibilities. And Paul, I'm not hearing you. Is anyone else hearing Paul?
No, I'm not hearing him either.
I just unmuted Paul,
Okay.
but I'm
Go
not
try
hearing
again.
him.
Do you want to try again, Paul?
He says he's talking, so something's happening.
In the interest of time, how about we fast forward to my parts, and then maybe we can troubleshoot and get him going, because I know that it's getting late for some folks.
Okay. Yeah,
So
Paul, you may just want to shut it down and open it back up and see if that might help.
Let's try this. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yay, there he is.
Yes.
I had to change the selection for my microphone, so now we're good.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Good to go. Thanks.
great. Thanks. Sorry for that. So I'm Paul, the research librarian, and I have several areas of responsibility, research projects, of course. But what surprised me is that my primary research is actually not in economics or finance, which is what I would have expected when I came on the job. Instead, I do a lot of research for employee professional development materials. So for professional competencies or areas of professional growth, I will curate books and other media to support courses and individual professional development. Also, I do a lot of research into diversity and inclusion. And I do a lot of monitoring of particular topics in the news that are of interest to the bank. So there may be a particular topic related to banking that, for example, cannabis, the cannabis industry and banking. Since cannabis is a cash-only business, it creates a lot of issues around what to do with the money and how can banks deal with that. So there are developments every day in the news that I follow and keep people abreast of what that information is that they need to know. I do presentations and webinars, so I'm going to be at Internet Librarian next month talking about creating partnerships with clients. So if you are in the Monterey area and you come to Internet Librarian, I hope you come to my session. I did a webinar for minority-owned business leaders on gathering business intelligence, a webinar for our police services on how to do research for executive security. So my responsibilities are really all over the map, which I find quite interesting. I also do outreach and marketing to make sure that people who come to the bank as new employees or who are already at the bank know that we're there and what we can do. And I also am responsible for our intranet presence, which includes all of our digital resources. Thanks. Next slide, Anne.
Okay, so for my work and responsibilities, just similar to Purina, the archives program is fairly new when you think that the Fed has been around for over 100 years. It was just 2005 that we were able to, before my time at the Federal Reserve, we were able to start an archive program really as a pilot. And so there's a lot of backlog, a lot of sort of making the case and showing how an archive can have value for that work. I'll bring up one quick example for the oral history program, just to the idea of cross skills. I loved oral histories, I should say, and I took my first class at San Jose State that really sparked my interest. Well, there's a lot of transferable skills from that, and so when we were having, like Paul said, our P+C, people and culture area was doing something about competencies and interviewing some of our sponsors to be able to take messages from them. I was able to work and consult on that project to say, well, here, basically we're doing interviews and we're curating content. So that's a good example of saying something that's certainly not traditional oral history, but that you can say how your skills apply. I do love to keep sort of one hand in the library world still and do backup for our news tracking and analysis, and then always love when special projects come up that keep me building up new skills and exposed to new things, but also being able to say, oh yeah, I have a connection to that from other work that I've done, and making it known how I can add value. On to you, Paul.
So I echo what I've heard a lot of other people say about a winding career pathway. So I started by getting a BA in psychology from UMass. And then for the next several years, I worked in a lot of different areas. So I did market research, I worked in human services, I did administrative work, and held some tech positions. And then eventually landed at San Francisco State University, working in the Office of Research as an information specialist. And so I did grant and funding research in support of faculty projects, and I held workshops for faculty around those issues and maintained the website. What I didn't realize was that I was actually doing a lot of the work that a librarian does. And this kind of dawned on me when I went to a workshop held by a librarian about doing funding research, and I realized that she and I were doing almost exactly the same job. So I had been trying to think of a way to grow professionally, and it seemed like a really obvious area to move into to actually get my MLIS and become a librarian. So that's what I did in 2012. I started my degree and completed it in 2015, so I'm a fairly recent graduate. While I was in the program, I became involved in the SF Bay Area chapter of Special Libraries Association, and I volunteered to chair their Technology and Innovation Advisory Council seat. And while I was doing that work, I met the person who would become my future boss. So this was an extremely fortunate kind of networking to meet someone who then could become my boss. So I joined the Federal Reserve Bank in 2015 while I was still a student. So I had actually not graduated yet. I still had 2 classes and my e-portfolio to do. So I was wearing 2 hats at that time, which was both exciting and a challenge. Next slide, Anne.
Yeah, we were all very happy for Paul when he graduated, could take a breath. So I have a pathway that is mostly in cultural sector of my bachelor's in American Studies, and then I was an elementary school librarian and public librarian. While those didn't require the degree, so they were more technician sort of positions, both of them. It was a wonderful experience and showed me what I like and don't like about the public and the school environments. Then through an internship that I'd done in undergrad, I was able to get a position with the Wells Fargo Corporate Heritage area, the Wells Fargo Bank, and they also had a special library, but this was separate. This was the historical services area. So we had the archives, museum, and other things, and so I really enjoyed just sort of doing not library work specifically, but realizing that that was an area of interest, so I used the tuition reimbursement program and got my MLIS from San Jose State while I was at Wells Fargo. And then the position came available for the Federal Reserve Bank for librarian and archivist, and I love that combination. I will very clearly say, just like Paul, that I don't do a lot of deep economic research. I've never even taken an economics class, which I regret sometimes, but it's interesting. I've worked for 2 places with banks in their name, and that's not my area of expertise, but we learn. And then since coming to the Federal Reserve, I've also gotten the Academy of Certified Archivists distinction, and completely echo the idea of working with professional organizations, also even things that are a little bit outside maybe of what you would define as your professional area. And Paul has a great story to talk about that.
So these are my career tips from someone who's new in the profession. The first thing I would definitely recommend is just to get seen as an upcoming professional. I can't say enough about the importance of informational interviews. So I met my future boss while I was volunteering for SLA, but then I asked her for an informational interview, and that was how I really got a chance to sit down and talk with her and get to know her and have her get to know me. So that when a position opened up, I was able to apply for it, and she knew me and knew to pull my resume out of the stack and give it a careful look. So informational interviews are really, really important. Joining a professional organization is a great way to meet people, but I would also recommend trying to volunteer for something within that organization so that people can actually see and get to know you. So I think of kind of strategic volunteering. What kind of volunteer work can you do that will get you noticed, either within a professional organization or in a library, public library? Volunteer for something that is really visible. So instead of maybe volunteering to shelf books, think of a programming idea that you might have and pitch that to the library, maybe for a writing workshop or a puppet making class, something that you have some expertise in that they might want to offer and that they will see. And attend conferences. There's often student rates that are very low. When you're thinking about what you can do, think about your soft skills. So these are not necessarily specific job skills, but they're things like how well do you collaborate, build relationships, can you demonstrate your curiosity? These are actually the qualities that my boss told me later she was really looking for when she was hiring for me. I came in without any background in economics or banking, like Anne said. And as someone who had not yet gotten my MLIS. So she was looking for really those kinds of soft skills that really you can hone in any job. And think about them if you're, even if you're working for UPS and you're working behind a counter, you probably have to use emotional intelligence to deal with difficult customers. Maybe you are being innovative by thinking of some new process or collaborating with coworkers. So think about your job in that way when you're talking to someone about what you do. And then just think really broadly about your future possibilities, the type of information organization. I thought I would become an academic librarian because I had worked at SF State so long, but that turned out not to be the case. And don't worry so much about whether you have particular subject matter expertise. A lot of people have said that so far this evening. You can learn that kind of stuff on the job. Okay, thanks, Anne.
And then my career tips, I'll echo everything Paul said, plus just highlight a few. Make sure people know what you're interested in. When I was at Wells Fargo, I was very happy at my job. I really enjoyed it. But then when I would interact with the folks at the Federal Reserve Bank at a special library association, local chapter event, it came up about that someone would be retiring. And so, oh, but of course you wouldn't be interested. And I said, no, actually, I'm always open to thinking about new things. And that completely changed the conversation. And then they started to really keep me in mind. So, but if I'd never made it clear that I was interested in a transition, they would never have thought to do that. And then stay flexible, explore what's possible. I'd been in San Francisco for 9 years, and then my husband got a new job in San Diego, and I talked to Cindy Hill, who again is really amazing, and said, hey, I'm probably going to have to give notice because I need to support my family here. And she said, well, could we think about having you work remote, and what would that look like? So now I do a partial remote schedule. That's me doing a video chat. And there you can actually see our windows. There you go. And then my last tip that just came to me today is if there's any library temp agencies in your general area, to think about reaching out to them. We're hiring right now for a part-time contingent worker, a temp worker. And so I had a good conversation with Catherine Gent from Taylor & Associates here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she was talking about the labor market and what it was like for her. She was saying she can't find a legal librarian right now, a really good law librarian, desperately, and has really good openings. So that would be a perfect person if you want to, especially if you're thinking of moving to an area, to say, hey, what's hot and what do you see as really important skills? And there's our contact info. You're welcome to reach out to us. And now I'll turn it back over because I know we have gone through our time.
All right, thank you so much, Anne and Paul, for all that information. I want to thank all of our speakers tonight. We are a little over time, but we're still going to do a couple of questions if our speakers are still able to stick around for a little bit. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I know some of you have already done that, but if you have any additional questions, please put them in there. Thanks, guys.
So we had a question for Gabrielle from a couple of people. They wanted to hear more about the Parts Petting Zoo, and we're hoping that you could talk a bit about that, Gabrielle.
Okay.
Are you there, Gabrielle?
Yes, I was
Okay.
waiting for you to unmute me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yep, you're good to go.
Okay, all right. My Parts Petting Zoo. I always had this extra space in the library when we moved to our new location. And because it's an agile work environment in our new location, you can't keep things on your desks, which includes engine parts. You know, and engineers like to have jet engine parts on their desks so they can look at them and discuss them with team members. And we decided to put them all in one central location, and that included engine parts and displays that HR used to have. So they've all come to my library. So what I did was I cataloged engine parts. I learned all the different parts about an engine, where to find the information internally, what the part was called, the part number. So I cataloged it in my online library catalog, and everything is barcoded. And right now, a lot of parts are checked out for STEM events. So they're used for recruitment. And I do have a lot of people who come into the library. I can hear them clanging around in the drawers and looking at the various parts. And I have some very large parts, like a rear turbine cast and an axle, and so there's some really big heavy parts in addition to very small parts. But it brings a lot of people in, and calling it the Parts Petting Zoo has been kind of fun. Everybody seems to like that, and it brings in a lot of foot traffic into the library.
Thank you. What an interesting idea that even you can check them out and And
I know. It's like, yes, it's like, I'd like a compressor wheel, please. I'm like, okay, go ahead and take it. And so it's really great. So it brings a lot of people down to the library, and things that used to be just squirreled away in desk drawers is now out in the open. And we made sure that everything was okay because we checked with export control and to make sure, because we are heavily regulated in company, that it was okay and it was kosher to have all of these engine parts available for people to use, because they're all marked as scrap, and there's a flaw in the part, so it's just not usable. But it gives people a good sense of what that part is and how heavy it is, and you add all those parts together, and it's like, and that goes into a jet engine.
that's great. Our next question is for Amy. Someone wanted to know if other zoos have libraries, because it seems like it would be a good thing for many of them to have.
That is a great question. So there's definitely fewer libraries than there are zoos. Zoos in the US are accredited by the American Zoological Association. So with that accreditation, they have to demonstrate that they have some kind of like source for information, but often that's just a collection of books, or maybe an agreement with a university library where they can use that or something like that. So I would say there's maybe 5 or 6 libraries that have some kind of librarian, but it's really just the biggest, maybe 3 or 4 that have a full-time librarian. Oftentimes in smaller zoos, they'll be like part librarian, part animal registrar, and sometimes also part veterinary technician, which is kind of crazy. But it is really important, especially as zoos move further into conservation work, because it's full of research. So maybe we'll see a change at some point. Does that answer the question?
Yes, Anne, thanks. This is Amy. I had asked the question, and I'm just curious because there's so many large libraries like the San Francisco Zoo, the St. Louis Zoo, so many of them, and I thought, what a great network.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, St. Louis is one of the ones with the librarian. Also, the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York. They work with the Bronx Zoo, Brooklyn Zoo, and the aquarium in New York. And there's one in, I can't remember if it's Columbus, I believe, and then Brookfield in Illinois. So that's most of them.
Great. We also had a question for Anne and Paul. It was about starting a new archival program, what you would do in terms of digital records with that. Since you guys just started in 2005, did you have to deal with digital records?
Sure, I can say that we definitely have digital records, and it's something that is the bulk, of course, of our new acquisitions are digital. And so the things that I would suggest would be for an individual in that role, would be to really think about reaching out to records management, whatever function that is. Sometimes they would be together. In our case, they're 2 separate areas, and records management is part of facilities or administrative services, I should say. Sort of workplace services. And so, getting to have a good relationship with them, but even more than that, to also see what you can have to document, to say something has to come to the archives, or something shouldn't come to the archives if you don't want it to, because it doesn't fit the scope of what you're collecting. So unfortunately, I've seen where a lot of times people, and I've had this too, where we'll build up a really good relationship, and then that information management person leaves. And it's like, oh, well, now we're starting from scratch. So anything to help sort of get something in writing and documentation about active records. My second tip would be to think about automating things whenever possible. Like, instead of having to physically say, okay, I'm going to need to capture this file or this intranet story or something like that, to really investigate, even if it takes more time and you get a backlog, is there a way to automate that so that it's just flowing in naturally with less sort of manual work? And then the third would be to really, you have an existing program or an existing institution that has already a lot of work behind it. So to really do some informational interviews with folks to say, hey, what would you find of value? If you're doing a project and you're wondering about something, what would be a type of record or, a class of documents that you would say, gosh, we wish we had that, or we look for these things a lot. It would be so nice if it was an institutional saving of this, as opposed to somebody that happens to just be really good, that's an admin, and then they leave and we're not sure. So to learn from your users of what would be of value.
Great, thank you. That looks like all of the questions that got typed into the chat box. If anyone has anything else, feel free to type in the chat box or hop on the mic and go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, well, no more questions are coming into the chat box. So I want to take this time to once again thank all of our speakers for joining us tonight. I know a lot of people got a lot of information out of this program. I know I'm probably going to go back and listen to a lot of the tips that you guys gave as well. I want to remind everybody of SLASC's next program. It's going to be on October 23rd. National Treasures, Unlock the Secrets of Government Libraries. We're going to have some speakers, librarians from different government and military libraries. So join us then. And once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a good night.